Oh, hi. Oh, hi. Hi. Oh. Yep. Why do people keep waving at me? Ah, hello, you too paid for the thing of which I paid money for. Yes. The simple wave, the sign of acknowledgement, recognizing a friend or someone you may never know who is just on a similar path to you. The wave is a sign of respect, usually reserved for motorcycles.
Of course motorcyclists wave. You're taking a stand against the mundane, against all the cagers of the road. You're saluting another road warrior who's choosing the more interesting route.
So what the heck am I saluting Jeeps for? That just seems like waving at someone for buying the same thing as you.
And don't get me wrong, as I drive around the United States and Canada in my L300 Delica, I wave at every single one that I see. Every 2 months I see one.
In 2022, the Jeep Wrangler almost outsold the Camry. And if you throw in the Gladiators to that mix, they did by a decent margin. So it's not a wave of rarity. And of course this isn't every single Jeep. There's no Compass waving to a Wrangler. Well, I guess there's no Wrangler waving back. This is a Wrangler to Wrangler phenomenon, this Jeep wave.
A wave best explained with a history lesson.
A history which has far more in common with that two-wheeled machine than you would expect.
Like Captain America, the Jeep is a product of World War II. But unlike just having one of him, the American military wanted thousands of cheap-to-produce, quarter-ton, cross-country vehicles sharing interchangeable parts. This need stemmed from the US military deeming their fleet inadequate following World War I and recognizing that war was going to become mechanized. They sent bids to 135 different companies to complete such a vehicle, but in the end only one company showed up with a prototype.
That company was American Bantam. American Bantam was a small car manufacturer that actually originated from American Austin, the American division of the Austin Manufacturing Company that was building the Austin 7. When the military asked for their go-anywhere light truck to be versatile and lightweight, American Bantam had an ace up their sleeves.
They didn't have to slim down, rather they just had to add a drive axle to one of their existing platforms. Cue the Bantam Reconnaissance Vehicle, a small, go-anywhere four-wheel drive vehicle that, apart from being over the weight limit of 1,300 pounds, a figure the military quickly gave up on, realizing it was not feasible, it was a success.
Unfortunately, all is fair in love and war, and American Bantam was a company only made up of 15 people, so they may have designed one of the machines that would help win the war, but they didn't have the people to build the amount needed. What ended up happening is they had to hand over their designs to Ford and Willys Overland to build the eventual 650,000 that would be ordered.
Final knife in the wound was Bantam's biggest wartime contract would be making trailers for hauling behind their competitors' Jeeps.
It's a well-known fact that the fastest car in the world is a rental car, while second to that is the company car. In the 1940s, the company happened to be the US military, sending several 100,000 GIs and several 100,000 of those. The original Jeep was likely one of the first 4x4s many of these young men had ever seen, and they were instructed to drive them where many roads and infrastructure wasn't. They were all just kind of introduced to the art of driving around off-road.
From the word's general purpose, they took the G and the P. They called me Jeep. Sounded more like a noise than a name.
Once the war ended, well, they wanted to bring that home.
Maybe you try it. Maybe you try it. Maybe you try it. Maybe you try it.
That go-anywhere attitude of the Jeep is still there within it. It's one of the few vehicles you can buy with a live front and rear axle. Say what you will about the abilities of other quarter-ton pickup trucks, but factually, this is a better off-road setup. This Rubicon edition gives you disconnecting front and rear sway bars along with front and rear locking differentials. The amount of configurations that you can play with this thing off-road is immense. If there's something I love as much as going quickly on the road, it's going slowly off-road. I mean, right now I've got the front and rear sway bars disconnected and I've got the front and rear diff locks locked, and I'm crawling down something so steep in 4-low first gear because there's just something so crazy about what you can do with these off-roaders. And it's so much fun at not even registering on the speedometer miles an hour. It's like I'm just holding myself with the seatbelt. And the Jeep offers you so much variety in the way that you can do it. You're aiming for no branches. It's just fun to go really, really slow.
We're one and the same. Our capabilities are the same.
When you're driving this thing off-road, you just feel unstoppable. You feel like you can go anywhere. Ooh. I don't know. Okay, maybe only in a Wrangler.
At the same time the Allied forces were gathering up thousands of Jeeps, they started to acquire two-wheeled vehicles as well.
And of course, motorcycles were around before the war, but it was that conflict that introduced thousands of Americans to the motorized horse.
Countries such as England, Australia, and Canada were all riding Nortons, where Americans were riding Harley-Davidsons.
These iron broncs can go across country. In fact, they plan to cut across quite a few countries. Keep them playing, Yank.
Post-war, the design of the Jeep went to Willys Overland and they started making Jeeps for civilians. Over time, both the motorcycle and the 4x4 took off, offering more models from more manufacturers and a wide variety of different features you can buy.
The new Ford Bronco in the Toyota Land Cruiser. Blazer, the extra value personal car truck.
A Scout is like a lot of cars, but it's definitely not a car. It's a, well, it's the International Scout.
You meet the nicest people on a Honda bike. That's how I met my baby and I really like.
At the core, I think the motorcycle has stayed more consistent, whereas the 4x4 has such a wide reach that it's hardly recognizable today to what it was.
Ooh.
Except for the Jeep.
Don't get me wrong, they quadrupled in size and weight from the original Jeep. I mean, of course they've changed, because the original Jeeps didn't have doors. In 1947, when the first Jeep truck came out, it had such luxuries as a windshield and doors, but it still didn't have anything like this with cruise control, climate control, heated leather seats. All of this is just what we expect from vehicles today. They're still very Jeepy. And while there are still some purists that would say that the original open-top Jeep or the knucklebuster motorcycle is the way to be, I would say that the modern ones are nicer to use and nicer to live with on a daily basis while they still hold that Jeep and motorcycle charm. Jeep has even figured out how to keep their drivers inside their own cars. The styling isn't the only part of the Jeep that has retained some Jeepiness. I honestly would say this is one of the nicest 25-year-old trucks I've ever driven. The shifter feels very old school and notchy. The engine is not a turbocharged unit, so you have to rev it out to get any of that 285 horsepower. There's no torque down low. It's a very old school feeling. And then my personal gripe, why am I sitting so high? I have smacked myself on this in this filming day probably 5 or 6 times, and I don't understand why I'm up here. It's ergonomically troubled.
And of course, when driving a Jeep, there's always that little thought in the back of your mind as you see every bridge expansion, pothole, or bump, that this could be death wobble. Maybe Jeep drivers aren't waving at each other high, they're waving at each other like motorcycles, signaling good luck. Yet at the same time, I feel like there's something else.
Call me a sucker for good advertising, but I think something's happening as I drive this Jeep along. I'm hearing the slight whispers of a P-51 Mustang firing up on the airstrip. I'm hearing the roar of a B-17 Flying Fortress flying overhead. I'm envisioning someone probably near my age jumping into a Jeep 70-odd years ago, and while there's worlds apart between the two people, we're both in a Jeep. And it all makes sense now. You don't buy a Jeep just because it's another car. It makes a statement about yourself. You're willing to sacrifice comfort and safety in the name of go-anywhere ability. I see every mountain peak as a challenge now. I want to take the doors off because that's how they would have been when these were first made. I buy a Jeep because it can keep up with my adventurous habits. Jeep! Yeah! Wow. Jeep. Yeah. Or at least that brand recognition helped move 180,000 of these things last year. Because you know what's almost as cool as riding a motorcycle? Saying you ride a motorcycle.
Even to non-car people, you never need to explain a Wrangler. In fact, the only time you ever say what model Jeep you have is if you don't have a Wrangler. And unfortunately for the enthusiasts, most of them are purchased as aesthetic items.
Head of Jeep Design estimates that 10 to 15% of their customers actually take Wranglers off-road. I don't know how they figured out that number, but I don't doubt it.
Well, that aesthetic is a lot harder to sell when it's half of a Jeep and half of a truck.
Because of course for every Jeep that's never been in low range, there's a pickup truck that's never had a thing put in its bed. You're combining two criminally underused things, but taking away the aesthetics of both. And then I told him I didn't even notice the mountain was there. Oh, hey guys. Excuse me, can you leave? You're a truck. Pickup truck, my ass. That looks like Honda and Tonka designed a truck together, you chisel-jawed ridgeline. Come back to me when your towing capacity's in double digits. When you buy a regular quarter-ton pickup truck, you'll never have to explain it a day in your life, because no one will ask. Buy a Scrambler, well, you're making a statement people don't understand.
And while it may not look the part for those looking on from the outside of your Jeep truck hybrid, that heritage, that sense of pride for the brand, well, it shines through just as well in the truck as it does in the Wrangler.
Does it really matter if it makes sense to someone else?
I really appreciate all my friends that helped me make this show happen. Paul, who lent me the Jeep, or Matt, who's standing behind the camera. This is his motorcycle, and I haven't ridden one in 2 years.
I don't wave when I'm on a motorcycle because of some grand gesture, because of some bigger picture. I wave at someone on a motorcycle because of the same reason I go to a car show. These are toys. They're modes of transport that are fun. And it's nice to acknowledge when someone else has the same idea.
Whether or not they're rare, well, that logic is the same for Jeeps.
I don't think you have to truly like cars to know that new cars are getting less interesting. It's one thing to say you have to rev the engine out to get anything out of it, or you say you get to rev the engine out to get something out of it. It's weirdly easy to heel and tow this thing, so you can actually get this downshifting and blipping up nicely through that shifter that makes you feel like you're working. With restored square bodies selling for near Jeep prices, doesn't that show that we want something to drive old school? Jeep people, the ones who keep them, are a passionate crowd, and I see why, because you really have to work it to go really not that fast. And therefore you grow an endearing sense of connection to it because it has flaws. If the wheelbase of a vehicle that you're driving on the road is too long that you can't get to the places that you want to, then yes, go get yourself a two-door Wrangler. But I'd be very surprised that your daily driven Jeep is going to be too long wheelbase for the trails you're going to take it on regularly. In the same sense that if 7,700 pounds of towing capacity doesn't work for what you need a truck to do regularly, well then no, this isn't the truck for you.
This latest generation of Jeep tiptoes the line between a usable daily driver and a go-anywhere explorer better than any Jeep of yesteryear. On top of that, these modern ones have features that would rival luxury cars of times gone by. A Wrangler driver might be able to say that it's less capable in a Wrangler, and a pickup truck driver might say that it's less capable in his truck. But you can drive away happy in the knowledge that you're the most capable combination of both that you can buy. Because
this truck is aiming for the people that want to use both, not look like both. And that's a smaller market. But if it's a little too new for you, maybe something off the beaten path and a little more Japanese might be your style. Check out this video here.